Hello, Ryan here, aka Mac, and welcome. There was a new info dump about all things graphics. As always, a huge thank you to all of my patrons and channel members. Thank you all so much for the support. It is truly appreciated. So last week, Cloud Imperium shared an update regarding all things graphics, answering many of our questions on various graphical subjects for Star Citizen. Basically, they wanted to let us know what is actively being worked on by the graphics team, giving a bit of a high-level overview. Now, let us start with ray tracing. Firstly, they are working on the ray tracing bounding volume hierarchy, which is required back-end work that he says for most games are usually quite complex and expensive, so for Star Citizen it is even more so with its scale and moving zones. He also says that for ray tracing global illumination, they are making good progress, and this is actively being used in Squadron 42, but there is still improvements required to several areas before it is ready for the persistent universe. Now this is something that I am very interested in, so happy to hear that it's progressing, even if there is still a lot more work to be done. And for ray traced reflections, they say for the first version of this, they will use screen space colors for objects on screen, and simplified material representations for objects off screen, with them currently having issues with noise and blobbiness to resolve. So as we know, seeing a truly realistic reflective surface looks incredible in games, and I'm sure for Star Citizen, it'll just be even more so incredible. So excited to see how these reflections come along, and it sounds like they're working their way up to getting it to all its glory. Now, moving on from ray tracing, they are also working on screen space probes, which is a system that triggers and combines the results from global illumination, both ray traced and probe based, reflections, both ray traced and screen spaced, and occlusion, which doesn't really mean much to me. I don't understand a lot of that stuff, but for character decals, he says this will be used for things like scars, wounds, and potentially tattoos, but the intention for this is also to be used for Squadron 42 cinematics, character customization, but also dynamic damage from weapon impacts. Now, of course, as you can expect, for character customization, being able to choose scars and whatnot will be a nice option for a lot more variation in our characters. But for me, hearing that we will see dynamic damage appear on our characters one day is very interesting, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it will of course just look very cool. Seeing yourself and your crew take damage realistically as they get into scraps and whatnot, but more importantly for other things like the medical profession. Now, Cloud Imperium have stated in the past that they want things like the medical gameplay to be more visceral and not just about using beams. The whole beam citizen thing is just to get these gameplay elements into our hands with the intention of physicalizing where they can in the future. But being able to physically see an ailment of any type on a character could open up a huge potential for visually diagnosing and treating injuries with more tactile and hands-on methods. Not to mention how Cloud Imperium want there to be illnesses and viruses. So being able to see, for example, the change in skin, like patchiness, rashes, and so on. But for the actual weapon damage visuals, they did also say that there is a lot of work left to do before we will see them in game, so it won't come any day soon. But for me, seeing what the potential can bring in terms of other gameplay with this physical damage is going to be so cool. Anyway, moving on to Vulkan, the new API, not the ship. He says there are constant improvements required for performance and stability for Vulkan, and they are frequently adding new extensions to enable new technology and optimizations. He also says that in regards to multi-threading, they have found that multi-threading the renderer has given a huge boost to the time of the render job, for example from 30 milliseconds down to 10 milliseconds or less in a complex scene. However, they also see that the renderer job is often not the bottleneck, so it's very content specific based on the scene that you are rendering, and of course your own PC's hardware. So as we know, when they bring in multi-threading, not everyone will see a performance benefit, but for those who do, it sounds like it could be quite a considerable benefit, but again that will scale based on hardware, the scene you're rendering, and so on. Now for PlanetTech version 5 and Genesis, he says this is a huge change to how they distribute all content on planets, with the goal being much better visuals and performance and provide more power to gameplay systems for things like harvestables, mining, and creatures. Now, as we know, this will improve a lot of things, like better biomes, seasons, soil variations, and so much more, but it does sound like these changes will also play a big part in updating the ecosystems to make fauna and their behavior and day-night cycles more believable, open up many more harvestable options, and mining options too. Now, as we heard at CitizenCon, when it comes to mining and the distribution of resources, they're going to make more sense to the environment and be clustered together. Hopefully, this also leads the way to mining veins, as that would be such a cool addition if they're still planning to do it. But either way, I am looking forward to seeing Planet Tech version 5 and this whole Genesis stuff start to trickle out. It won't come all at once, it'll come in incremental updates, but I am very much excited for it. Now, for video memory, it says they are overhauling how video memory is budgeted to force the developers to remain in budget while also giving us more control in how we allocate the video memory for each graphical effect. And the end result, they say, should be better performance for everyone, as low video memory looks to be their #1 GPU performance issue. Now, that is interesting, and this is something that we do see more and more in games today, offering the option for where you want to spend your video memory budget, which is based on what you prefer or what your hardware is. Now, I suppose one big benefit of Squadron 42 being in the optimization phase is that we will see a lot of these optimizations and graphical options for the persistent universe come along as well, benefiting us playing the alpha greatly, and likely a little earlier than we would have normally seen in any sort of game development, as optimizations are often some of the last things to be done. Now, for damage maps, which are what they use to accurately track and present the damage and salvage across the ships, this, they say, currently has a significant cost in terms of things like performance and data, so they are compressing these maps down to a fraction of their raw size so that each packet of data is a maximum of 32 kilobytes. Now, I don't know what their current size is, but this is obviously going to be very important, especially as we see things like Maelstrom roll out, and of course as salvage evolves further. Now, it was mentioned that graphics changes in the main branch, being the internal build, I presume, includes many stability and performance improvements to Vulkan, including multi-threading, HDR, shader optimizations, and much more. But these changes are also intertwined with many other parts of the codebase, like wider rendering changes and profiling and memory management changes that pretty much touch every system. So the Vulkan changes can't trivially be integrated into Star Citizen without the rest. So they are waiting for Star Citizen to take the full main branch, but they want to do this carefully and roll it out mindfully as well, as much of the main branch has had a lot of work to make Vulkan fast and stable, but the rest of the main branch may not be at the same state. So there will be a lot of consideration into when they integrate all of this, how long they test it, and how much of a risk they are prepared to introduce to each release. Now, I guess with the intention this year being playability and stability, they will likely keep these updates in the tech preview channel, as they did state, to try and test it for as long as possible before unleashing it to the live build. As we know though, when things hit live, they get those much greater numbers of players, and issues don't often reveal themselves until that point is met. Anyway, there was a few other points to address. Firstly, for secondary viewpoints, there's a confusing sentence, they're not going to happen due to performance reasons. This, I think, is somewhat referring to things like picture-in-picture scopes, for example, where rendering a scene twice will be too heavy on performance, and then basically result in an FPS drop right as you're about to aim down sights, which is obviously a pretty crucial moment in a gunfight. That said though, they say they can still support all the basic rendering in a secondary view at a sensible cost for things like security cameras, so anything that doesn't need to be, I suppose, high-res and such can still be done, which is really cool to think about, as this could open up security cameras on board ships. We know in the brig could have security cameras, even having a member of crew on board sat at a station looking through the ship's security cameras, just watching the internals, making sure you don't have any stowaways or people doing questionable things. But for landing cameras, he says, and I do agree with this, A top-down camera is not very useful when it comes to landing on a planet, as you cannot judge the scale of the landscape. For example, a boulder could be 50 feet tall, and another one next to it could be 2 feet tall, and if you're looking directly down, you're not going to tell the difference. Whereas something like a LiDAR, depth, or holo render is much more useful at conveying distance, speed, and of course, topography, which also makes it much cheaper to render, and to me makes perfect sense. Having a secondary view, like a downwards facing camera, even if it's not full res, will still be useful, still have its benefits, but for landing, a highly informative UI representation will be much more helpful, because they can just throw in so much more information to help the pilot. Anyway, there you go. That is some great insight from Ali regarding all things graphics. A big thank you to him for taking the time out to answer these questions and provide more information. There is obviously a lot going on the graphics front, and not just in terms of very important optimizations, but features as well, that will add so much more to the various aspects of Star Citizen's persistent universe, like the character decals. This may seem like a small addition or a trivial addition for something like a character creator, but in reality, for Star Citizen, this can drastically open up a lot of very interesting, skill-based, tactile, physical gameplay. Now, before I finish, for those interested, as mentioned recently, I am starting a second YouTube channel, but this one is nothing to do with Star Citizen. It is all dedicated to things outdoors and camping. I have yet to post a video there. There is one coming of my most recent trip to the Lake District, where I camped in a hot tent in strong gale force winds and rain. It was pretty savage, but it was a lot of fun. Feel free to subscribe if the idea of watching me suffer in a tent appeals to you, and I look forward to seeing you over there, for those of you who are interested. Now, the channel is called Wild Camp Adventures-Mac, but it's probably better to follow the link in the description below, and as I say, that video will be coming out either this week or next. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of all of what was mentioned by Ali Brown. If you did, please do consider subscribing. We are about 150 subscribers away from 70,000, so thank you all so much for supporting me. If you want to come and hang out while I'm live, you can do at twitch.tv/SuperMacBrother, or you can stay here on YouTube. I stream on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 2 and 6 p.m. GMT, and you are all more than welcome regardless of whether you are new to the game or a veteran. A great place to ask your questions. Hit the thumbs up if you don't mind, it does the channel a big favour, and tick that notification bell if you would like to be notified when my videos go live. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons and channel members. Cannot do this without you guys, so thank you for the support. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.